The White House is calling on Congress to pass comprehensive immigration legislation, but efforts in the House Thursday were unsuccessful. A conservative bill failed to get enough support from Republican lawmakers, and a vote on a compromise bill has been pushed to next week. President Trump responded to the legislative drama Thursday night. In a tweet, he said immigration legislation could not pass without Democratic support and accused them of not caring about border security. CBSN political contributor and Associated Press White House reporter Zeke Miller is in Washington. All right, Zeke, so what do we know about the fate of the compromise bill?
Well, we know that they need more time, and nothing is new in Washington. This it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. We've seen this play out time and time again with immigration legislation in Washington over the last 11 or 12 years. Every time this issue comes up, it seems like there might be a breakthrough, and then every time at the very last minute that something else comes up. And here with House Republicans again, they thought they had one last chance in the before the midterm elections to pass an immigration bill and send it off to the Senate, where they hope it'd be somewhat more favorable, and they don't have the votes. They don't have the votes tonight. They were originally going to try to vote Thursday, didn't have the votes, then they pushed it off to Friday, don't have the votes, so now it's looking like next week when they're probably going to bring it up for a vote. Assuming they have the votes, then they're going to make some more tweaks. Our reporting is that they're going to be trying to add things like E-Verify, tougher measures to that bill to win over Republican votes in the House, where Republicans hold the majority. And they haven't been successful at that so far, so they're going to try to make it add some more sweeteners to win some conservative members onto that legislation next week.
Well, sometimes delays can present opportunities for presidents to get involved in the legislative sausage making, but I wonder what we know about President Trump. Is there any plan for him to get involved? And if so, what would that look like?
There hasn't been a real effort on the part of the president to get involved. His White House was very involved in this process separately from him, even a couple of weeks ago, trying to draft this compromise legislation, and that was sort of before this separate discussion, this national crisis over the fate of these separated migrants, children from their families on the southern border came up. This is a sort of a quiet effort that was taking place on Capitol Hill between White House legislative affairs officials and congressional Republicans. So the White House has been involved, but when the president went up to Capitol Hill on Tuesday, he was in that room. He didn't really talk about immigration. He wasn't talking about the sausage making and the legislative process there. And his tweets so far have not been designed to sort of win over Republicans. He's met with some Republicans, made some phone calls, but he's not out there trying to really do the nuts and bolts of legislating. He leaves that to his aides. Instead, he's blaming Democrats. And the fact of the matter is, right now in the House, the problem is not Democratic votes. Republicans control the House. They can't find consensus among their conference to get something done. Obviously, in the Senate, where there's the filibuster, it's a different story. They do need Democratic votes, but right now their problem is not Democrats in the Senate. It is Republicans in the House, and it remains to be seen if the president will try to arm twist there or not. He's made some calls. He's done some meetings so far, but those efforts, he'll probably have to step up those efforts along with leadership on Capitol Hill if they have a chance of passing something, and that's still pretty long odds on a subject like this. And if you look at the past history of this issue for the last decade in Washington, it's always been intractable, and there's really no reason to believe that this time will be any different.
Yeah. Well, meantime, the administration's zero tolerance policy is still in place, and there are a lot of questions about what happens next for children who have already been separated from their parents. Was the Trump administration prepared for implementing or even reversing any of this?
The short answer is no. The officials at the White House, the Justice Department, Homeland Security, and others had warned that this was going to be an issue going back to May of this year, shortly after the zero tolerance policy was put into effect and announced by Attorney General Jeff Sessions. The Attorney General gave a speech in which he basically predicted that children would be separated from their families, and that's what came about. This outcry that we've seen over the last week and a half, 2 weeks or so, number one, caught the White House by surprise, and then their efforts to fix it, that executive order that the president rolled out Wednesday, caught everyone else in Washington by surprise, even members of his own White House. It caught his legislative affairs team by surprise, because they were hoping that the crisis moment would sort of put pressure on those congressional Republicans to get something done on Capitol Hill legislatively to do something. But also on the implementation side, officials have been scrambling over the last 48 hours or so, trying to figure out what exactly they are allowed to do under the law to reunite these families, how quickly they can affect that, and then also what to do about new people who come across the border illegally, people who are bringing their children along with them. How long can they be detained for, and in what setting and what context? So those conversations are happening. We are all awaiting and been asking for hours and days now for official guidance on the implementation of this executive order. And if you ask the different agencies, we're getting different answers. There is no real firm thinking of what right now will happen to new border crossers and how long it will take to reunite children who've been separated from their parents back together.
So amid that lack of clarity, you had First Lady Melania Trump visiting a child detention center in Texas Thursday. First of all, what is the message that her visit is intended to send? And also, is there any backstory on how her visit even came about?
Well, one of the things that we learned in sort of the run-up to this executive order that the president signed with some fanfare on Wednesday was that he was bending to a bit of pressure he was getting from the First Lady. A White House official close to the First Lady sort of put out a statement saying that the First Lady had been encouraging the president to do everything within his power to keep families together. And what White House officials had said was that they needed Congress to act, but that there was this other sort of third path in the executive order that allowed them to sort of test a sort of a complicated legal. It's complicated with the legal strategy there with the Flores settlement agreement, but essentially challenging a federal settlement agreement that the federal government reached with a court that would allow them to that limited the number of days that they can keep children who cross the border illegally in detention, and that required them to separate, they believe, their families. The executive order sort of pushed that challenge to try to keep those families together. The First Lady's office and people and the White House officials said that she was encouraging the president to do more. She saw the images, the audio, the footage that we've all been looking at, watching, heartbreaking images over the last few days, and encouraged the president to act. So she went down to the border today, and White House officials said that was something that she did herself. She was not asked to go by the president. It was not sort of meant to sort of gin up sympathy or something like that. That was her decision to sort of take the agency on this issue. She was moved and affected by these images and wanted to go see for herself and see what she could do and report back to White House officials. So that's why she went down there. Obviously, there's been a separate bit over the jacket that she wore and the Washington component of that trip, what message that was sending. But officials tell us that the message of the trip itself was that she wanted to go down to the border, visit with these children, visit with some of the caregivers and law enforcement officials, learn more about this issue, learn more about these children and their situations, and then report back to White House officials.
Finally, Zeke, switching gears a bit, the Office of Management and Budget Director Mick Mulvaney presented a plan to reorganize some federal government functions during a cabinet meeting. Part of that plan includes combining the Departments of Education and Labor. I want to play his comments explaining the proposal.
If you make a cheese pizza, it's governed by the Food and Drug Administration. If you put a pepperoni on it, that's governed by the USDA. If you have a chicken, it's governed by the USDA. If that chicken lays an egg, it's governed by the FDA. But if you break the egg and make it into an omelet, that is now covered again by the USDA. If you have an open-faced roast beef sandwich, that's one or the other. But you put the bread on top of it, it's the other one. A hot dog, the hot dog meat is governed by one. You put it in a bun, it's governed by another. One of my favorites, if you have a saltwater fish, you have a salmon, and it's in the ocean, it's governed by the Department of Commerce. Once it swims upriver, it's governed by the Department of Interior, and to get there, it has to go up a fish ladder governed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. This is stupid. This makes no sense. And
by the way, that was incredibly sad. I think you should put that on television, not what I said.
Okay, so Zeke, what can you tell us about this proposed plan?
Well, a lot of this isn't anything new. That salmon line there might not strike you as new. You've heard it before back in 2011 when President Barack Obama was basically making that same joke, this corny dad joke during his State of the Union when he had his own plan for government reform and trying to streamline some of these the inefficiencies within the government when it comes to something like education and health and human services. That's a plan that's been floated around Washington for a while. I mean, obviously the name on the Department of Education says it's involved in education, but so much of that so much of the department is loans. It's not sort of setting standards for education. There and grant programs and things like that, things that other agencies do very well themselves, and then the plan. What the administration says is that they're trying to sort of match like with like across the federal government. So when it comes to sort of streamline all the, who governs the life cycle of fish in waters, and then and controls things like that, or when it comes to trade and other areas of the government, they want to streamline, match like with like, and they believe that there's some efficiencies to be had moving, combining or moving a lot of the functions of the Department of Education and the Department of Health and Human Services together. The chances of this happening in an election year, not going to happen. The chances of it happening even later on in the president's term, maybe parts of it can happen, but there are a lot of entrenched interests when it comes to things like this. Lobbyists, lawmakers in Capitol Hill who all have entrenched interests. There are federal workers who are going to have a lot of concerns about this. So will something happen right away? Probably not, but it's an idea that is not necessarily new, but it's one of those interesting areas where the administration is sort of claiming it's trying to drain the swamp by taking an idea that's been floating around the swamp to reform the swamp for a very long period of time and sort of elevating it once again.
All right, Zeke Miller, there's never a shortage of things to talk about with you, Zeke. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.